Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeff. And big shout out to Brady for being here as well. And thanks to all of you for carving out time out of your busy schedules to spend the next hour with us. We're really excited to dive into the state of multi-channel donor communications. And to kick us off, I actually want to reach back into my own professional archives. Before I settled in with life here at Virtuous, I'm a fundraiser by trade. And early in my career, I worked for an organization called Invisible Children. And we did a little experiment that some of you might remember. It was called Coney 2012. And at the time, we orchestrated what was the most viral campaign in the history of the internet. It advocated to end a child soldier conflict in Central Africa at the hands of a rebel warlord named Joseph Kony. And this campaign, in its first 5 days, received over 100 million views in a week. And we struck a deep personal chord with tens of millions of people around the world. And we raised more money in a week than we usually raise in a year. And a big part of that success was multi-channel communications. We used email, we used phone, we used text, we used mailers and social media and YouTube. But really, what we tapped into to make things really personal is we did something pretty special offline. And I got to become best friends with a boy from northern Uganda called Boney. And Boney was a former child soldier who shared his story personally with over 35,000 people around North America in 10 weeks. And as I saw him share his story and we traveled the country fundraising, this issue and this war halfway around the world all of a sudden became deeply personal for me. And as it did for the thousands of people who got to meet and hug and be in the same space as Boney. And as a fundraiser, I saw a transformation and I realized that my job as a fundraiser isn't just about fueling mission critical funding. My job as a fundraiser is I get to see people find their voice and their passion and dedicate their time and talent to donating and raising money for us. And so what I saw was that I saw donors and supporters having transformations themselves. And I think it's the most beautiful part about the work that we do. And it just really drives home that giving is extremely, extremely personal. And it also shines a light on a bigger problem. And that's that most nonprofits are handcuffed to one, traditional fundraising strategies, but also to systems that are largely impersonal. And these models are forcing fundraisers to rely on impersonal, unresponsive fundraising tactics. And instead of creating connection, these traditional tactics are actually alienating us from our donors, and they're creating distance between the donor and the impact that the donor is making. And this is today's, fundraising model that we're used to. We have donors coming through events, mailers, peer-to-peer fundraising, personal connection through friends, and then we drop them into a calendar-based, generic, mass spray and pray appeal cycle. And it's one-way communication, it's impersonal, it's disconnected. And this is a fundraising model that is based in a world that no longer exists. The world that we're fundraising in has changed. In the days of sending impersonal direct response marketing where we cross our fingers and hope for a 3% response rate, those days are over. The model is intolerable for our donors who are living in a completely new world, and we need to reimagine our fundraising. And the world that our donors are living in is one of mass marketing based on personal experiences. Everything is tailored, curated content and experiences based on interest, and it's two-way behavior. Some of the biggest companies, Netflix, Spotify, Amazon, they're responding to customers based on data signals and delivering content in a way to speak to the hearts and minds of consumers. And as nonprofits, we need to make this shift as well, because our donors are living in this hyper-personalized world, in this hyper-personalized space. Brands across industries are tapping technology and customer insights to deliver these personalized experiences. And it's led us here in the nonprofit sector to a bit of a generosity crisis. We're seeing in a year, we're losing about half of our donors in turnover. And over the last decade, we've lost 25% of our mid to low level donors. And donors are opting out because of inappropriate asks and messaging, but as well as we're lacking the ability to acknowledge people really transparently at a deeply personal level about the impact that they're making. And so we're left pretty frustrated, and we talk about donor retention in this sector. It's very well socialized, it's very well researched, and it's a wrung out topic, but we can't seem to find the answer. And so it led us down this path of, especially in 2020. 2020 was a chaotic year, and organizations that adapted and created hyper personalization for their donors, just checking in on them, on their hearts, and saying, how are you? How are you in this moment? We think that this quote from Seth Godin really drives home that some organizations will thrive in this increased chaos. Some will be unprepared, and some will merely fight and lose. And so as we think about this model here at Virtuous, we're looking at this traditional model. We believe in a different way forward. We believe in a way forward that is much more responsive. And responsive fundraising is about giving nonprofits technology and tactics to be able to better leverage human connection with every donor. We believe in listening to why donors give and identifying the key signals. We want to be able to connect with donors where they are. We want to connect personally, and we can do that through automation and segmentation. And we want to be able to suggest what is the right thing to do at the right time to the right person, and then repeat this cycle to create a much more integrated donor experience and donor journey for all of our donors. And so imagine for a moment that, you have a donor that, we also here at Virtuous, we love to highlight some of our partners, which is Classy. And, imagine that, someone attends a virtual event powered by Classy, and within 1 hour, we're able to automate a thank you email that includes a survey so that we can collect some more information about a donor's interests. That then triggers an automated task for a member of our development team to give them a call. And then 2 days later, after that task is completed, they get an automated SMS text from the program team based upon the interests informed from that survey. And so as we look at meeting donors where they are across multiple channels, we can get more personal. And what we're seeing here at Virtuous really powerfully is that our customers are using multi-channel, and we're seeing across the board an increase in retention, we're seeing an increase in average gift, and we're also seeing an increase in engagement. Whoop. I double clicked by accident. And so where this led Virtuous is, the core of responsive fundraising is multi-channel. And where we were sitting, we saw a problem, and we built a tool, and we saw our customers having success with a better solution. You were seeing firsthand with our customers and clients as they adopt this responsive mindset. And we just didn't want to stop there. And that's where Next After came in. And we teamed up with the Next After team to take this a bit further and to do an observational study around how organizations today use multi-channel, and to provide further insights into our own nudges that we had about multi-channel. And so we wanted to validate our observations and get an index around what are other organizations doing to prove this hypothesis. And we were really grateful to partner with Next After for this study on multi-channel donor communications. And I'm psyched to hand it over to Brady, because the results and findings and key takeaways are fascinating. Brady?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. And thank you again, everyone, for being here. So we're going to talk about this research, but first we need to define multi-channel in the context of this research. So when we look at multi-channel donors and do an analysis, there's many different ways you could talk about multi-channel, right? There's different channels within online, there's omni-channel. We try to keep it simple. We think simple is a great place to start. So when we talk about donor cohorts or groups of donors, there's really 4 main ones. And one is offline only. So these are donors that will only write you a check. That's the only way that they give to you. Then there are offline donors with a valid email. So you can send them emails, you have an email for them on file. So they write checks, but they at least have the chance to receive emails. That's a different group. Then you have online only donors. These folks only give to you online through your website or through some online means, And then you have these multi-channel donors. These are folks who write a check or give offline and make an online donation within a 12-month time period. Often calendar, sometimes fiscal, but within a contained time period like 12 months. So those are 4 main cohorts. So that's kind of like what we're talking about, and what we were trying to figure out is these are what are organizations doing to kind of engage these different groups of donors. So, Brian talked about some of the success that they were having around virtuous clients using multi-channel. We've seen the same thing. So when we kind of aggregate a bunch of our client data and we look at those cohorts and the revenue in the 12-month time period, we see something like this, where those multi-channel donors are actually worth 3 times more than online only or offline only donors. So, here's some fodder and some data to say, well, why should we care about this study or multi-channel donors? There's reason number 1, they give a lot more within a year. But here's what's critical is it's not just about giving in a year. What we're trying to do is build relationships, focus on lifetime value, and we look at donor retention. I'd argue slightly with Brian and say this isn't actually very well researched. It's very well known, but we don't know what actually moves the needle very well to retain donors. If we did, then hopefully we'd be doing a better job and not stuck in the mid-40s like we have been for 2 decades. Anyways, we know that this is one of the ways that we can actually retain more donors is actually multi-channel. Folks who give online and offline are 24 percentage points more likely to be retained the next year than offline only, and 31 percentage points more likely to be retained than online only donors. So multi-channel donors give more and are more likely to give year over year. Now, if your fundraising brain isn't saying, let's go, how do I get more of these types of donors? It should be. But it's not just about how people choose to give. Humans aren't just ATM machines, right? We know where people interact isn't always where they transact. And this is probably the most interesting data point that we have to make the case for multi-channel is that offline donors who have a valid email, so people who only write you checks, give 84% more than those people who only write you checks and do not receive email. Just by having the chance to receive email, people are 84% more generous, even though this will never, ever, ever show up when you look at who gives online, because these folks aren't giving online. They only give offline, yet they are heavily, heavily influenced by email, by online. And we as consumers and humans, we know that. We don't live in just one channel. But as we try to make the case for things like digital and things like that, we need to be stepping back and looking at our donors more holistically and not just where do they give as the only means by which we measure. And then it's not just about mail and email. We know that phone plays a critical role. So a famous experiment from Penelope Burke in donor-centered fundraising, she ran this test where a new donor received a thank you call from a board member within 48 hours that just said thanks. And they found that those people who received that call actually gave 39% more kind of downstream or later on compared to those who received no thank you call. So there's some critical elements in there. Is one, who the call came from, when it came from, and what the message was. High-ranking board person came within 48 hours and didn't ask. All it did was say thanks. But we know that the phone influences giving as well in other channels and later on. So donors who give and or receive multi-channel communications give more and are more likely to give year over year. So then the question is, well, how do we find them? How do we grow them? How do we steward them? Where are these folks? And when we look at the pathway to a multi-channel donor, we see time and time and time again that the online donor, an online acquired donor, a donor who starts out giving to you through the website or online, is significantly more likely to become a multi-channel donor than an offline acquired donor. In fact, according to our data, it's 463% to 14,400% more likely to become a multi-channel donor. This is part of the case for investing in a digital first type strategy. But online acquired donors who give and or receive multi-channel communication give more and are more likely to give year over year. That's essentially the case statement of why should you care. It's really, really critical. But that's why we wanted to do this research with Virtuous, and a huge thanks to them for helping perform and letting us do this study. Because we wanted to see, well, what are organizations actually doing? If we know that this is so valuable, we know retention is a problem, what are nonprofits actually doing? So here's what we did in terms of the research. Is we went out and we made $20 donations, both online and offline, to 119 of the exact same organizations at the exact same time. It's actually kind of difficult to line that up, to make an online and offline gift at the exact same time to that many organizations, but somehow we found a way. And in the end, we were successful both online and offline to 102. So as we show stats and things like that, those are all going to be divided by 102. So 102 is the denominator here when we do our analysis. We also were curious about the giving experience, as we always are. So we looked at the giving process, the thank you screen that we saw afterwards, and the ways to give page. I'm not going to talk about those today, but you can find them in the report. And then we tracked all the messages we received over email, mail, phone, and text over 4 months to both the online donor and the offline donor. And then each of those communications were classified as a solicitation, where the main intent of that communication piece was to ask for money, or cultivation, anything else. Thank you, newsletter, receipt, blog post, anything that wasn't a main intent to ask was coded as a cultivation. And then we did a little bit of a deeper dive on 47 direct mail appeals and 64 email appeals. And again, I won't touch on that. You can find it in the study. So that was our research process to try to figure out what were organizations doing in terms of multi-channel communications. And we learned some very interesting things. So the root question is, are organizations taking a multi-channel approach with their donors? And again, we looked at online and offline. And particularly for offline, the answer was a resounding no. Only 7% of organizations sent at least one email and one piece of mail to the offline donor in those 4 months. So that was actually, pretty shocking. We thought the number might be low, but that was quite low. And if we look back, you can see here that only 16, 17% of organizations sent the offline donor at least one email in that 4-month time period. Now, that was also shocking because we see that stat of how much more valuable offline donors are when they receive an email, yet very few, 17%, sent just even one email in a 4-month time period. And it gets worse, only 2 out of 10 organizations, 20%, sent our offline donor 0 communications in any channel of any type in 4 months. Complete and utter radio silence. Nothing. That's both shocking and sad. I should have some like sad GIF in here as well. So in the end, to answer our question, we found that just 3% of organizations used multi-channel to both donor types, meaning they sent at least one online and one offline message to our online donor, and at least one online and one offline message to our offline donor in a 4-month time period. That was pretty shocking and surprising as well. So you don't need to be like a data scientist to come up with this type of key finding, where very few organizations are communicating to their smaller online and offline donors in multiple channels. Based on our experience and research methodology, that is just a fact. Very few organizations were doing it. Now, if we kind of dig a little bit deeper, I've already basically made the case for this one, but the offline donor is very much getting lost, right? If we're seeing 20% of the time, they get absolutely nothing. And only 16, 17% of organizations are sending an email, which means very few are actually practicing multi-channel. If we dig into it a little further, we can kind of put the averages of communications to each donor side by side. This is what this chart is saying. You can see here, on average, the online donor received 5 times more communications over this 4-month time period than the offline donor. Even though you can see that cultivation ratio, really kind of interesting, important metric. That's for every time we were asked, every time you ask a donor, how many times are you sending cultivation content or non-ask content? You can see the ratio is roughly the same between the online donor and the offline donor. It was just a volume issue. And when we look at gross communication, so not average communication, we see that the offline donor actually received 10 times fewer messages, almost entirely driven by significantly less email volume. So if we know not a lot of folks are doing it, that's kind of the data point. The other cool thing that we get to do at this study is we get to observe nonprofit behavior, and we get to like chart out their communications, like this organization, Buckner International, and we get to see how many emails did they send to their offline donor? How many times did they mail the offline donor over this time period? We can see they actually sent 39 emails to their offline donor, where the average was 11. So pretty significant volume, and a lot higher than the average in this study. And then they mailed the offline donor 5 times in this time period, where the average was 3, so a little bit higher. But when we look at that ratio, again, of how many cultivations, non-ask content did they send for every time they asked the donor, it was really high. It was a 4.5 ratio, which means for every time they asked, they had another touch point, 4.5 times, where they weren't asking. The main point was to cultivate, to engage, to connect, to steward, to thank, and not ask, which was significantly higher than the kind of benchmark figure that we found in the rest of the study. So they were one of the few that kind of practiced multi-channel to the offline donor. And when we looked at what they were doing, we saw this really interesting time period where in the first few weeks, they actually have like a offline welcome series. And so I thought this was really interesting. This is something that the technology at Virtuous makes, actually quite easy for organizations to do. And it looks something like this for Buckner. So within 3 weeks of the donation, they sent us the thank you receipt. What kind of interesting observation here is you can see they actually have a reply device or a buck or a gift slip here where you can make a donation on the thank you receipt. So that maybe seems a little counterintuitive. It's something that we've actually tested on the digital side and see anywhere from 3 to 30% of folks will make an immediate second gift or upgrade to recurring after they make a one-time gift. Because and I know there's a lot of testing been done on the direct mail side, particularly in like social service and homelessness industries, verticals, where this type of strategy is actually really, really effective. So something that they do. 2 weeks after that, we received this handwritten, or at least perceived to be handwritten. It could have been done by one of those fancy machines, but a handwritten postcard from a donor relations person. Just said, hey, Paul, thank you so much for your gift. My name's Sarah. Glad you're a part of the Buckner community. Something very personal. Thank you. And on the front, you can see there's a bit of branding and more about the organization. That same week, we received this impact postcard. It's kind of neat. You can see the front cover there. It's personalized. Paul, that was our donor's name. Paul, your gift made this possible. And then on the back, they had a little bit of content and a QR code that you could scan to go online and watch the rest of an impact story. Now, a week after that, we received another impact postcard. This wasn't personalized on the front with our name, but had a very similar format. This was a little bit more organizational centric. Here's a bit more about Buckner. Go online using this QR code and find out more about the organization. And then 2 weeks after that, we received the appeal letter. So this was the first time we were asked via the mail. You can see the appeal here. It's a little small, but here's what it looked like. It's very simple, very short, succinct, one-page appeal. They had a QR code that you could scan and go to a mobile optimized donation page to complete your donation. And then on the reply device here, you can see they don't have a gift array. Normally more often than not, organizations have, make a donation of 50, 100, 150, 250 or something like that. Buckner just had this open field. Please make a gift of blank. And what's interesting there, and what we found in our testing research, is when you have a very generous donor base or a high average gift, higher than normal, sometimes it's better to actually not even try to guess how much they should give and just stand back and let them be generous. We see something similar for like larger donors, mid-level to major donors, and repeat donors. Where gift arrays are normally really, really useful are for like new donors, younger donors, people that maybe aren't sure how much they should give. The gift array really helps. But for some other types of donors, perhaps not even having a gift array, whether it's on your offline appeal or on your online giving page, just having it open could be something worth testing, but they did that on their appeal letter. So that's what happened on the offline side. And it was kind of this automated sequence, right? Thank you, postcard, 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 appeal over this time period. And then we received emails as well. So 5 emails in this time period, 2 emails in this time period, another 5 emails in this time period. So altogether, over this 52 days from donation, we received these multiple touch points, both online and offline. So it took 17 days to get the receipt. And then all of this communication was actually within 35 days. Now that you may be thinking like, that's a lot of communication early on. And that may be more than what you do. It's worth looking into. But what we know about donor behavior is this first time period, the first like 2 to 4 weeks, is actually when they're most likely to open and click and engage with emails. It's most likely when they're going to make a second gift. And it's most likely when they're going to upgrade to become a recurring donor. That may be counterintuitive, but that is donor behavior. So there's a real opportunity here while people are engaged and connecting with your organization you don't necessarily have to move to an ask, but you have to engage in this time period when they are engaged instead of waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks, 5 months, whatever it might be. It's not a winning strategy. You need to engage when they engage. That's part of being responsive. And that's what this organization was doing. But again, it's not just about asking. One of the most critical things that you and we can do in fundraising is do more and better cultivation. This is one of my favorite experiments. We have over 2,500 of these different experiments now in our research library that you can access. And this one, what was really interesting is the organization found that their kind of cultivation ratio was inverse, was opposite, meaning for every, they were sending 2 solicitations for every cultivation. So they were asking a lot and cultivating very little, said this could be a problem, how can we change this? So in this experiment, they added one more email, as actually one more email a week, where they would send it to the donor and say something like, here's a blog post that you might be interested in. They did that for 3 months. And over that time period, they saw that those who received the extra email, cultivation, engagement, opens and clicks went up 80%. Donors, people who actually gave, went up 8%, and revenue went up 21% from sending more email that did not ask for money. They got more engagement, more donors, and more revenue. It's pretty amazing. So they kept it going for another 3 months, and over 6 months, they saw a 42% increase in giving and a 54% increase in opens and clicks by sending more communication that did not ask for money. Now that should be like, hopefully a really cool experiment, because who can't send more non-ask content that adds value to the donor? We can all do a better job of saying reporting and impact and story and blog posts or whatever it might be on a more frequent basis, and we can increase the likelihood of them giving. So that was kind of key finding number 2, the lost offline donor, an example of what Buckner International was doing in their offline donor welcome series. And again, we can focus on the ask, but there needs to be a lot more time and attention focused on the cultivation, particularly in the first engagement period where they are engaged with us. All right, so key finding number 3, when we showed these kind of charts side by side, we called out basically the negatives of the offline donor. And part of the reason why that stood out was compared to the online donor, the offline donor was significantly less likely to get multi-channel communication. So the opposite of that is the online donor was more likely to receive multi-channel communications. It was still only about 55%. We sent at least one email and one piece of mail to the online donor. So it's a little better. It's not great. There's not a lot of people doing it, but it's definitely better. And when we dug into it a little bit more, we noticed the volume around mail was really, really, really low. And then when we looked at organizations who sent more than one piece of mail over that 4-month time period, we found that only 40% sent more than one piece. So 60% of organizations sent only one thing in the mail. More often than not, it was the receipt or a welcome package. So again, that's good. It is multi-channel, but it looks like only 40% of organizations are doing anything a little bit more intentional about engaging an online donor offline. And remember, this is important because those high value multi-channel donors that give 3 times more and are more likely to be retained, they're coming from online donors more often than not, as opposed to offline donors. So this is also a big opportunity, the online donor opportunities. How can we engage online donors in offline channels? Don't assume that just because how I give is how I also want to communicate. And don't assume that because I give online, I don't and will never respond via mail. Now, there's ways to ask for donor preference. There's ways to test that, but don't just automatically assume that where someone gives is how they want to be communicated to. And then key finding 4, you may have noticed like, oh, I thought they tracked phone as well. Why are we just talking about mail and email? Well, the reason why is very, very few organizations use the phone at all in this 4-month time period. In fact, less than 10% of organizations total left a voicemail or called either the online or the offline donor, and only one organization in the entire study sent a text. I should clarify that the organizations in the study, the vast majority of which had revenues of $10 million and above. So there were a few small and some mediums, but the majority, about 70%, were larger organizations where things like automation and systems you wouldn't think would be as much of an issue. And it was, especially when we look at phone, very few organizations use the phone. And so it's interesting. And then the question is like, well, why? Why were organizations possibly not using the phone, right? We know that there's value in the phone from things like Penelope Burke's research, but organizations aren't doing it. And one of the reasons why is 24% of organizations, when we gave online, had no way for us to give a phone number at all. So when we sent in our check, we said, here's our phone number, here's our email, please contact us. And when we gave online, we tried to give as much information and opt into as many communications as we could. But a quarter of the time, we couldn't even give our phone number, even if we wanted to. But what's more interesting is 76% of the time on the online side, they had our phone number. And 17% of the time, they mandated that we give them our phone number. They required us to give us their phone number, even though we've seen other experiments where that could decrease giving as much as 50%. They required it, and then they didn't use it, or they didn't use it in the first 4 months at least. So that's one question. If you're going to require it, why are you requiring it if you're not going to use it? And because there's such low volume, we could actually look at all the voicemails individually and try to do a mini analysis. And this is what Kevin, who is one of the researchers on this project, slacked me after doing the quick analysis on the postal donor, said all but one organization that called the postal donor were calling to determine gift designation. So why you'd want us to designate an undesignated gift is an interesting question, but the real kind of damning part of this is not one of them said the word thank you. Very few people called. Most of them were trying to get us to designate an undesignated gift, and not a single one said the word thank you. Not one. We can talk about tactics and strategies, and there's all kinds of things to do there, but this is a cultural problem. This is a cultural problem. The fact that the offline donor did not receive any communication from 20% of organizations in 4 months is a cultural problem. Yes, there's some system challenges. It's a cultural problem. We wonder why we're still in such low donor retention rates. This is why. You know, it's not one person's job to be donor-centric and focused on donors. It's the organization, leadership on down. So when we see this, people calling to interact with a donor, and they don't have the training, the sense to even just say the word thank you, it's unbelievably problematic, unbelievably problematic. Versus something like this. Yes, good morning, Kevin. My name is Mario. I'm with Hope for the Warriors, and I just saw you recently donated to Hope for the very first time. I just wanted to give you a quick call and say thank you. We really appreciate your support, and we just want to welcome you to our family. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out at number. Thanks again, and have a great day. Simple voicemail, simple touch point, job done. And especially now, there's tools like Sly Broadcast that we use that can integrate with Zapier, that can integrate with Virtuous, so you can set up an automated voicemail that goes out automatically. Looks like you missed a call, and it has a real callback number, and you can leave a voicemail like this automatically for pennies. There's ways to do these things that makes it feel personal to donors and doesn't cost tons of time and money. So on the phone, we saw very few organizations were doing it. Very few were actually using it well. So one organization, actually the only organization that sent us a text, was Doctors Without Borders. So again, because there was only one, we were like, well, let's see what they were doing. And here's what we found. Here's like their overall communication kind of touch points. You can see it's very heavy on the email, right? They sent over 60 emails in this time period. But on the texts themselves, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 texts that we received. The first one immediately after our gift that said, thank you for your donation. So they have some kind of automation there as well to send a text to new donors who provide a cell phone number. So that's kind of interesting. But the one that I want to highlight is kind of right in the middle there. They sent an appeal, a text message appeal in the midst of a Refugee Day campaign. So Giving Days, Giving Tuesday, Giving Tuesday Now this last year, North Texas Giving Day, a lot of higher eds are doing Giving Days. Doctors Without Borders was doing a Giving Day on World Refugee Day. And so we wanted to look at that. Again, we're just curious folks when we get into it. It's like, oh, I wonder what they're doing on the Giving Day. So here's what they did. The first email that they sent on the day went out about 8 a.m. Central Standard Time and looked like this. It's kind of a longer form appeal, heavy text, and then they had that one big donate now block. 2 hours after that is when we received this text. Mary from Doctors Without Borders. We're short of our World Refugee Day goal, and COVID-19 has made this work so urgent. Donate now. 3 hours after that, we received the second email that had an animated GIF countdown clock, something we suggest folks use in high urgency, time sensitive campaigns. We've seen it increase response up to 68%, a little bit shorter on the text, and then that consistent donate now block. And then 5 hours after that, here was this kind of final email in the campaign, very, very high urgency, very little text, kind of deadline, donate now, donate now. So this is what the kind of multi-channel phone and email communication looked like on the day. We did not receive a direct mail appeal on the day tied to this campaign. So if you know anything about kind of Giving Days or have looked into it, you know that what you do on the day is important, but what you do leading up to the day is just as critical, if not more important. And so we wanted to kind of zoom back and see, well, what did Doctors Without Borders do leading up to this Giving Day? So you can see the Giving Day here and the text that we mentioned here, but look at all these cultivation emails leading up to their ask campaign on the day, right? They had a quiz in there. They had an interactive kind of landing page where you could learn more about refugees and how COVID was impacting them. They had a conference call, webinar that you could attend. They look at all these touch points where they're educating, engaging, making you more aware of what's going on with refugees, so that on World Refugee Day, they can do that more high urgency type of ask. And that's where they set one of their other texts that lined up with their kind of online quiz that you could take. They actually didn't reach their goal, so they sent a follow-up appeal saying, we didn't reach our goal. Could you help us reach our goal? And then 2 days after that, they sent a thank you email kind of recapping the campaign. So they're the only ones that use text, but one of the key findings was very few organizations are actually using the phone. Definitely not in text, not so much using kind of calls and voicemails. And even when they did, it seemed to be a pretty lacking strategy. So the kind of recap the 4 key findings, very few organizations are communicating to their smaller online and offline donors in multiple channels. The offline donor is getting lost. The online donor gets a little bit more, but still remains an opportunity, and very few organizations are using the phone at all. So some of the things that you can do to help increase multi-channel, and hopefully we'll get into this more as we get into questions, but one of the things is try emailing your offline donors and mailing your online donors. Particularly emailing your offline donors. I'm using air quotes, which you can't see, but it costs you nothing to email your offline donors if you have it. So the fact that you wouldn't is kind of a big opportunity wasted with very little cost. Now, don't be afraid to ask, particularly sooner than you might think, but remember, it's not all about asking. Think about that cultivation ratio, both in the first kind of few weeks and then again over time. Consider that online or offline welcome series. Again, the tools available, tools like Virtuous, make this pretty easy to set up, where you can have a great welcoming experience in multiple channels for new donors. Can you try calling your new offline and online donors? Again, pretty quick, hopefully within 48 hours, just to say thanks. You can try to automate that with something like Slide Broadcast, and please say thank you if and when you call them. One way to collect emails is just ask for it wherever you can. We found that only 1/4 of the direct mail reply devices we looked at had an opportunity for us to give us email. So not everyone will, and if you do, you should say, here's why we want your email or what value we'll provide you when we get your email. But even just having a field for it is a starting point. And then if you're doing this kind of integrated campaign, then we suggest for sure pointing to a customized landing page that works in conjunction with your direct mail appeal, so that you're not just pointing people online and going to the homepage and then the thing that they were reading in the direct mail appeal is nowhere to be found. It's called congruence. And we know that the more congruent the direct mail appeal is or the email is to the landing page that you're pointing to, the more likely you are to receive a donation. Those are like the kind of the basics of multi-channel that not a lot of organizations are practicing. And then a few more advanced ideas. If you're sitting there kind of like yawning, like, yeah, old news. One, I'd challenge you to say, are you actually doing this? Because we found very few are. But if you are, that's great. Here's some more advanced tips, perhaps. Can you incorporate SMS or text? I know this is a feature that Virtuous just rolled out. So this is something worth maybe testing, even just on the thanking cultivation side of things, to start playing around with text message as a channel. If you're going to do an online campaign, try sending a postcard about 2 to 3 weeks before the online campaign just to say thanks. Maybe you can use that more personalized impact postcard kind of method that Buckner was using. We've got one experiment where sending this kind of thank you postcard before an online campaign grew revenue 200% from people who received the postcard. Again, offline influencing the online and vice versa. Again, you can automate those thank you voicemails with something like Slide Broadcast. Or another kind of channel we didn't really talk about is social media, which is generally poor for direct response, but generally great at things like acquisition, email acquisition, or impression-based marketing. So we've seen multiple experiments where if you just show non-ask Facebook ads, so branded Facebook ads to direct mail recipients in and around when they're going to get their direct mail appeal, their response rate goes up. Anywhere from 25%, we've seen increases up to 100% in revenue from people just seeing Facebook ads. Again, they'll never say like, oh, I gave to you because I saw a Facebook ad. They won't be able to put those two things together because it's working at the subconscious level through this concept of priming, where we can kind of put this touch point in strategically before we know they're going to be asked. For-profit brands do this to us all the time, and we don't maybe have the same amount of like breadth and budget, but if we're really strategic around asks that we know are coming online and offline, that's a way to make the most of advertising dollars. And again, if you're going to integrate an online and offline appeal, one strategy is to send an email 2 weeks before you know they're going to get a direct mail appeal. Just says thank you, kind of report back on the impact of their past gift, something like that. On the day that they should receive the direct mail appeal, you send an email that says something like, hey, be sure to check your mailbox today in the coming days. You should receive a letter from us asking you to contribute. This is why the need is. Here's how you can get involved. And then you maybe have a soft ask online, but you really want them to just go to the mailbox and respond via mail, which typically has a higher average gift. And then 10 days after that, you would send an email that is kind of following up on your previous email that is a more hard, specific ask, kind of saying, if you've already given, great. If not, now is the time. Here's why. And then you point to that dedicated landing page. That's kind of our starting point in terms of how you kind of integrate online and offline appeals. So that's a little bit more advanced. We're just kind of like scratching the surface on this research. I highly encourage you to check out the free report. Again, it's free thanks to Virtuous. They're making this available to you and anyone for free. You can go to multichannelnonprofit.com. And then if you want some other research, you can find it at our website. We've got different resources and training opportunities. You can find it all at nextchapter.com/institute. And then one final like little promo. We have these 9 online courses that you can take. And if you use this code multichannel, you can get 50% off any course or subscribe annually or monthly and access them all. So you can get 50% off using that code multichannel. So that's some of what we found. Brian's going to take it from here, and then we are going to have some time for questions. So let me stop sharing and hand it over to Brian.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Brady. That was great. All right. So what now? And here at Virtuous, there were really 2 key stats that stood out to us from this. And I think I need to get a little bit more creative with my slides and integrate GIFs the way that Brady did. Because, like I need a eyes popping out of someone's head GIF for this. Multi-channel donors have 3 times lifetime value than offline only and online only donors. And the other one, that insert GIF of eyes coming out of someone's face, is multi-channel donors were retained 12 to 24% more than online only or offline only. And the way that we're looking at this is, as we see increase in retention, increase in average gift, increase in engagement, where we're really left with is saying we have a choice. And ultimately, this is not a nice to do. This is a mission critical growth opportunity. And so in this dilemma of having to make a choice, we can do one of 2 things: stay with the same old, stay with a traditional disjointed static model, or have a more responsive, dynamic, personal, and multi-channel approach, and create a system that connects our donors and supporters to our story, to our mission, to our impact, and to the heart of our cause. And I'd love to leave you all with a few key considerations and questions. One is, do you have the right system to connect today's supporters with your organization's story? Does your current system allow you to help build connection with all donors, not just the top 10% and major givers? Why do our tactics contradict what we know actually retains donors? What can we do to close this gap and become more responsive? And what are the obstacles right here and now that are preventing us from taking those actions? And would love to let you know that we have more coming. We actually have another study coming out this summer on responsive dynamic campaigns and what donors expect, how to provide a better experience. And according to the partner study with the Next After, just to reinforce, only 3% of nonprofits are doing this. And so this is a ripe opportunity for all of us. And so we're really excited to continue digging into this with Next After throughout the year, and helping organizations like yours figure out how you can increase generosity for your mission and how you can build deeper, more personalized relationships with all of your donors. And want you to know that we're here to help. Virtuous, we consider ourselves your growth partner. And, we're not just a software company, we are dedicated to growing generosity for the nonprofit sector. And so we do that through our platform, but we also do that through playbooks, hands-on support, regular events and webinars that are all value forward to help push the needle on growing generosity. And we have lots of leaders and nonprofit teams that trust Virtuous to help them deploy multi-channel campaigns. Like Brady mentioned, just at the beginning of this year, we launched SMS texting within our platform, and we're really excited to learn more. We're really excited to get more information as our customers utilize more multi-channel through our tool so that we can report back what growth looks like when you dive deeper into multi-channel. And what you can expect from our technology is that we're a suite of responsive fundraising solutions. And again, at the heart of it, it's about allowing teams to build better, deeper donor relationships and growth at scale. And that's through a nonprofit CRM. It's understanding donor signals, knowing how donors interact with us online, using automation to speak personally to segments within our donor base, and also using automation through all of our marketing campaigns, and creating giving experiences that are frictionless and easy for donors to give. We want to reduce the barrier to entry. And we also want to be able to help. So if you email responsive@virtuous.org with the subject line multi-channel, we'd love to give you some more resources about responsive fundraising and a playbook that, regardless of what technology you have, you can use today with your organization to deploy more responsive fundraising tactics that can help you push the needle forward to become and adopt more multi-channel strategies and tactics. And also want to let you know that we're going to give a more intimate deep dive into how Virtuous allows organizations to deploy multi-channel campaigns. So next Thursday, February 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 12 Mountain, I believe Jeff is going to drop a registration link in the chat, but we'd love for you to join us, and we'd love to just show you hands-on through this demo, how you can use multi-channel to increase engagement and close the gap with all of your donors. So thanks so much, everybody, for attending. Thanks so much, Brady, for the partnership. Really value all the incredible work that you folks have done over at Next After, and we're psyched to open it up for some Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. In the first question we got kind of early on here for Brady the question was, how does this account for recurring donors? And that was asked at the time where you were talking through offline only donors with a valid email address, giving 84% more than offline only donors.
Yeah, so it depends a little bit from client to client, but more often than not, recurring donors are actually pulled out of that analysis. They're kind of their own group. So as you know, lifetime value and donor retention of things like recurring donors is unbelievably higher than one-time donors. And so if they are included, it really skews things. So they're treated more like a kind of different donor class, I guess. So this is looking more at one-time donors.
Great, thank you. And the next question is, do these tactics and strategies, does that just apply to kind of current and annual givers, or does it also apply to other giving programs like will and bequest or planned giving?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd be interested to know, what Brian has to say. We don't have any research and experiments specifically tied to, estate gifts and planned gifts and things like that. What I will say is that we have stories all the time where it happened twice at the end of the year, where through like a welcome series, an online welcome series after a content offer. So instead of sign up for a newsletter, you create a piece of content like an ebook tied to your mission or cause that is more interesting than a newsletter. People sign up, you deliver it to them, you deliver 3 to 4 other valuable emails over that time period, over the first 2 to 3 weeks. And one organization that used this strategy got a 7-figure commitment of a gift from pure online acquisition and content, where someone said, "This is amazing what you're doing. I'd like to give $1 million." So, again, not that that's going to happen all the time. That's an outlier. But this idea of when we start delivering value on a more consistent basis and engaging more donors, these types of things do happen. So that's one thing. And two, what I do know is that there's more and more planned giving strategies that are very much based on content offers and then marketing automation. So for example, there'll be like custom planned giving type websites set up, and you can actually track people when they visit that site, what they read, what they download. It will score people that are interested and actually give you information like a numeric score, where then you can say, hey, this person has been on your planned giving website 3 times in the past week. You should give them a call right now. And so that type of marketing intelligence absolutely is valuable and useful in major gifts, mid-level gifts, estate planning, planned gifts, etc. We just don't have the research and experiments to back it up.
I love that, Brady. That's a great point. And I think I would also just add, kind of to put on the responsive fundraising hat in relation to this question is that, at the end of the day, the real kind of heartbeat of this is that, we want to be connecting to any donor at a deeply human, intimate, personal level. And so I think we would encourage and we would champion, no matter what pathway a donor is coming to you, that every donor wants to be seen, heard, and valued. And so that's really at the heart of what multi-channel is. And again, like to Brady's point, like using data and signals and insights to better understand where are our donors' curiosities, where are they leaning in, and then being able to deploy campaigns that meet them where they are. So, again, like we're in the business here of truly helping build, deep and rich relationship, no matter where a donor comes from.
Yeah, that's great, Brian. And I totally agree there. Kind of meeting the donor where they're at and allowing them to support the organization the way they intend to. It's great. And the final question that we have here is around the mix of online and offline. What works best, particularly in an environment where we have a lot of digital overload between social media and in email. How do you strike the right balance there, Brady?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, hopefully studies like this help make it a little bit easier so you can understand what other organizations are doing, right? How many emails, how much mail are they sending over this time period? What's that ratio kind of look like? That's partly what we're trying to do and to provide a better starting point. This isn't to say what organizations are doing is working. This is just saying, here's what other organizations are doing. What I would say in general, on average, and most of the time, you need to communicate more, particularly via email. There's pretty much a direct correlation to the number of emails that you can send to. So the number of emails you have on file and the number of high quality emails that you send is basically correlated to how much money you raise online and then influences offline giving. Now, huge caveats in there. This assumes that you are doing good emails, not crappy ones, not impersonal ones that are just about asking and just about you, like quality emails and you're sending to engaged people. But by and large, every time we do this study, we just did one globally with 630 organizations in 9 countries, time and time again, we see that there's an opportunity to do more frequent, more focused cultivation communication. Almost every organization of every size and every vertical. Now, I'm not saying go from like one newsletter to like 18 emails in a month, but if you have like the one big newsletter you send each month, is there a way to take out one of those key stories and maybe send your newsletter and then one email just focused on one of those stories? Or if you're doing 2 emails, can you add in a third that's just about cultivation? Or if you're sending 4, can you add in another one? The key to like engagement is actually frequent, high quality communication. One of the worst things we can do is go long periods of time where we communicate nothing, whether it's through email or through offline. Now, the challenge is obviously time, resources, and cost. That I can't answer for you. I just know in general, on average, most of the time, every organization can send more communication, particularly via email, and definitely if it's cultivation related.
I love that. I think something else that stood out to me that you said, Brady, was focus. And I think to the point about resources and time, I would encourage focus, like get hyper focused on a hyper targeted, very concentrated segment and deploy and learn and see what works and what doesn't. And then use that to inform how you're also going to approach a multi-channel approach with other segments. I think focus is a huge part of being able to learn, adapt, and grow in real time.
Yeah, and thank you both, Brian and Brady, for today's presentation. And thank you to all of you that were able to join and for carving this time out of your day. We look forward to seeing you next week, where we're going to be talking about creating dynamic multi-channel campaigns at scale in Virtuous. So we'll show you how you can take some of these learnings and put them into practice with the Virtuous platform. Again, we thank you for your time and hope you have a great rest of the week.